forward this. Thanks. So this is part of what we do with the City of Austin Parks and Recreation Division is we do community engagement. And I'll do one presentation to our friends group, Save Austin Cemeteries, at their next board meeting. But one of the big projects we're doing, which is kind of behind the scenes, is trying to organize our burial information and data and historical research as we come across it. So in the future, I'll have a bigger meeting that's really about like, how are we doing generally? But I decided to use community engagement at this point to engage my peers who are struggling with similar things. And in this case, Kay Boyd, who helps me do this research so that I can figure out how to store it in an efficient manner and eventually share it with the public as a searchable database. In the meantime, I keep meeting up with new other people who are struggling with the same things. So I'm hoping that what we can do is document the process and use this as a resource. And after this meeting at some point, I'll hopefully reach out to Jenny again and see where we can go with this to have it as a resource for other Texas cemeteries, large and small. Do you all want to can I introduce you briefly each? Mark Heap has his video off, but he is a volunteer with Save Austin Cemeteries and is on the board. He is also a volunteer at Park Springs Cemetery in Manor, Texas, which is a historic African-American cemetery with its first burial in 1894, I believe Mark said. And it's about 9 acres, and they've been able to clean up and clear a few acres of it so far. Big volunteer project. I don't think they're quite terribly interested in the data management part until they get the trash hauled off. And we met this morning with a couple other people with other smaller cemeteries that they work with. So I'm trying to like get some feedback about what we're doing a little bit by little, and then maybe in the future we'll have a bigger group meeting or presentation. Clark Osborne manages 2 cemetery associations. One is Madisonville, right? Did I get that right? Not looking at my notes, trying to learn things. And he is much further along in the project, and he has his own GNSS locator and ground penetrating radar system and his own databases, and I'll share one of his maps as an examples. So he's very up to date on how can we do this for smaller, less funded organizations. So he's been able to give some good feedback, and he was at part of the meeting this morning. Andrew McCullough was connected to me through Preservation Austin last week, and he helps manage a family cemetery at Hornsby, the Hornsby Cemetery. And it has, you told me, Andrew, but I can't remember how many acres. But there's 3 acres? 3-acre cemetery. And he's just getting started on how to organize information, but they have done, I think, a GPR survey, is that right? And then now what to do with the data as they begin to collect it. Kay Boyd is a long-standing volunteer with Austin Genealogy Society as well as Save Austin Cemeteries. And she's my go-to expert for research on anything Austin cemeteries. And she is a hawk and tries to make sure we get it right. So I am very grateful for her mentorship. And Jenny McWilliams is in charge of historic cemeteries for the Texas Historic Commission. And then, who am I missing? Greg Farrar is on the call. He's one of my staff members who's helped me do a substantial research on the historic colored grounds, of whom he's a descendant of someone people buried there. And he's just gonna listen in and give me his comments later. So you may not hear from him today. And Caitlin Hill, who is the program manager at the City of Austin Cemetery Operations Division. So she and I collaborate a lot on how to organize all of this research going forward. We have similar but separate jobs, so we work together regularly. Did I miss anybody? I think that's everybody. All right, I am going to make sure I'm on the right slide and share my screen. And what I'm going to do is go through a few slides that are kind of context and introduction. And then we'll go through slides one by one and have a conversation. But I'm not very formal, and if you have comments or feedback, just jump right in there. You don't need to raise your hand, just talk away, all right? If you are a shyer person, you're welcome to engage me offline afterwards, and I will share this presentation with you because it's a lot of details that you can comment on later, and it's also got some links you might be interested in. Can you see my screen okay? Okay. So this is community engagement. It's a cemetery data focus group, and I appreciate your time and attention. So you're helping me sort out some details, and then hopefully once those details are sorted, I'll share it back with you for your use too, not a private process. Our goal today is to hear your feedback on the types of cemetery data we have and help determine what is interesting to the public. Over generations, many kinds of records were kept, all with opportunities for human error. And though we're fantastically grateful for all the volunteers who do transcription and field research, we always got to proof it and check it. And sometimes there end up being multiple lists and records, and we have to kind of go through and clean them all up eventually to hopefully have a good set. Handwritten records were transcribed, paper records were photographed, and some were saved as microfiche records, which haven't been digitized yet. As museum and libraries digitize records and images, more and more information can be found online. So we have a historic Austin African-American family, the Andersons, buried at Oakwood, and I hadn't seen a picture of Ernest Anderson, who was L.C. Anderson's older brother. He died young and was the first president of Prairie View A&M University. And my staff member, Alan Garcia, also works at the Carver Museum, and he scanned this and sent it over for our upcoming Juneteenth exhibit. So there's a lot of things that have lived in boxes and file cabinets in libraries and storage that are coming online. And so there's no central repository for all of this. So when we come up with a new fact or detail or photo of somebody, where do we know we've stored it? So there's a lot of information that's coming online that hasn't been available publicly before. If a small cemetery has 100 burials, it might seem more manageable to organize it. This is a picture of Plummer's Cemetery, a historic African-American cemetery in East Austin. And doing field research in 3 acres doesn't seem impossible. We know there are many more burials there than there are markers, but what we can see as markers, we can learn about. On the other hand, Austin's municipal cemeteries, including Plummer's, is 182 acres with about 80,000 burials, with many volunteers and many sources of data. So though our stuff isn't books like this, it feels like this in terms of like, there's all of these gems everywhere, and how do we start sorting it into themes and stacks and piles, and then start organizing those piles in a way that makes it accessible and available for the public. Our vision is to create a public-facing database to share that information, and we'll continue to gather it and organize it over time. And then we'd like to allow others to use our model as an example, not proprietary information at all. Our vision is to use a digital map of a cemetery as an organizational system to create kind of a virtual filing cabinet storing all the information we have about a person or their grave site at the location point of their grave. This is an example of what Clark Osborne is doing at Madisonville Cemetery. And this was a map he just published of veterans' graves for Memorial Day. So that one just already iterates with the last name showing, but if you click on it, you see more. This is an example of a third-party private database software called CIMS, Cemetery Information Management Systems. And it's a pretty hefty subscription fee, but it's got a lot of good fields. This is a screenshot of how you draw where the graves are, what's located in there. And then each location point has all kinds of fields about the person buried there. It's just not super affordable even for a big municipal cemetery like Austin's. And you can't import large spreadsheets of information. You enter one record at a time. And that isn't efficient for everybody. You can pay them a fair bit of money for them to import a spreadsheet, but that, you know, as you're doing substantial research, that's kind of cost prohibitive. Small organizations can't afford that. There are other types of software available, but that's the one I've been introduced to. Arlington National Cemetery has an interactive GIS map, and I mapped the GIS contractor who developed this for them. If you have a budget to pay somebody to create a public-facing database, you can do this using Esri software, which is also another brand, or you can do it as open source software that anyone can download, update, customize, and use. They have very simple data search fields. You can search by last name, first name, middle name, grave site, and dates, but not by POWs or Purple Heart honorees. So here's, what's really interesting, they also publish their data methodology of how they do this so that other people doing open source stuff can kind of go in and DIY it using their kind of data instruction. There's another example I really like, Hart Island, which is an island outside of New York City where people who were not claimed at the time of death were buried in mass graves. And they weren't notable people, and there wasn't a lot known about them other than they died and no one came to claim the body and bury it. And so they have a way that the public can crowdsource information, or family members who find out that that was their uncle can upload information. And so on this screen graphic, though, you can click on the link below and see other things. It says, Victor Rodriguez, age 53. There are no added stories for Victor. Be the first to stop the clock of anonymity for Victor. And so you can click on this add a story box and upload a story about him. And that's a way to collect and then review and check information about the person. So in our case, the city of Austin is a municipality in Parks and Recreation. We have a Esri enterprise license, so I get to use it, but a smaller organization would have to pay a hefty subscription enterprise license fee. If you're, as Clark pointed out earlier, if you're a cemetery organization that's typically classified as a 50C13, which is not qualify as a nonprofit status as a 501c3 to get their $100 a year membership. So if you're a 501c3, like an advocacy organization, not a membership organization, you could afford a $100 per license fee. But otherwise, it's also a little out of reach financially for smaller cemeteries. Esri does geographic information systems mapping, not unlike this one that you just saw and this one. Those are using that kind of software.
Jennifer.
Yes.
One thing that I left out this morning, they charge, even though Esri donates that software to nonprofits, there's $100 a year administrative fee.
Yep.
If you are using Esri for personal use, you can get the same software package and it's $100 a year. But then you just get in a little gray area, like I got ArcGIS, the whole Esri package. I don't use it much, but they gave it to me for the $100 simply because I was going to say that, well, this is my personal project mapping my cemetery.
Yeah.
A big corporate cemetery, they wouldn't like that. But an individual can get the full package for $100 a year for personal use.
Got it. Good to know. Thanks. The SIMS database is already in use by our cemetery operations division. And that contains private, family, medical, and financial and real estate information, which really isn't appropriate for the public. But we've got some overlap in the middle of what needs to be in both places and needs to be accurate. They also manage sales, and they use QuickBooks, which needs to integrate, and Maximo, which is a work order system for our whole repairs and maintenance issues, and it's got to interact with our mapping system. So we have to kind of put together in our organization how it all goes together. That would be the case for like a multi-county municipal group, or like different municipalities and organizations from the city, county, multi-county, and state level need different things for their data. But this is the particular way we figured out we need ours to interact. So this is what we're looking at as our draft. Before I get started too far, does anyone have thoughts and questions on just kind of my introduction and context? Okay. So this is where we start getting into the nitty-gritty, from which I need your feedback. There's very basic, straightforward information that we may not have every field filled out, or that person might not have every field. They may not have a maiden name or a suffix. But this is stuff that is often easily found in burial records. We've got a last name, a first name, a middle name, maiden name, suffix, title, prefixes. We have some people who are like a reverend and a general, so they might have more than one. Gender if known, nativity and birthplace if known, location of death if known, date of birth, date of death, date of interment or burial. Cause of death if known, cemetery name, you may be only managing one cemetery, you don't need that field. And some cemeteries are mapped using different vernacular. We call our sections lots and spaces. You might have a plot or something else. So that might be unique to your cemetery. And then a notes field, because in notes you could have name misspellings and variations. You could have multiple dates. Someone could have been disinterred and reinterred, which isn't super common, but that's where you would need to put in those kind of factual bits of data. Race, ethnicity, if known, spouse for family members. And then we'll get into sort of the stuff they did, the verbs of their life after this. But this kind of gets you the basic burial information. Kay, do you think we're missing anything there? Or does this get you the intro solidly done? And is this in a using language that's easily understood? You're on mute.
Mute. Now it says I'm muted.
Yeah.
Unless notes can be used for things like you said, POW, Purple Heart.
We'll get there.
Okay, well
So this is just name conventions.
No, that
First,
looks like
yeah.
that covers things we've done in the past.
Jennifer, one thing that cause of death was suggested in this morning's meeting. I would be really careful with that, especially if the death was in the last 25 years, because you can't get access to death records unless you're 25 years old. You may really run into some privacy issues with that, and then also like family members. Obviously, those need to be deceased family members, not living.
Right.
Okay.
You know, so they're going to be some private on as far as what's public facing. You know.
Right.
On the back side, it'll be fine, but I think you're going to run into some privacy issues with some of that.
Maybe cause of death if it was more than blah blah years ago.
Got it.
At least 25. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
All right, I've made those notes. Thank you. Let's see, anything else on that one? Shall I move on? Next one, Monument data fields. Clark, I worked on this since this morning. Does it have a monument? Yes or no? Monument type. And there, I put in this little graphic down here, monument type, which will need to be made better for people. But those of you who work in cemeteries, like, we would need an illustrated guide for most of the general public to understand that, but that's not undoable. Monument symbols, does it have a footstone? What type of stone, like granite, marble, limestone? If it's an unusual monument, what is the monument condition? Does it have an urgent issue of safety or damage? And then its conservation history. Has it been conserved, put back together, who did it, and such. Design notes, does it have something particularly unusual about its overall sculptural design? In the symbology notes, somebody might have done research on a unique symbol, and that's a good place to go put small amounts of text and then general notes right there. Anything big missing from that?
I've got a few things to add. We sometimes say whether it was facing east-west, or if the head is to the east. There are traditions where the tombstone is actually facing the opposite direction so that you don't stand on the grave when you view the headstone. So directional. And then some headstones have signatures. I think that would just go in the notes, but some headstones have makers information and things like that. Pretty detailed, but just my 2 cents.
No, your 2 cents is quite valuable. Thanks.
You have symbols and then you have the symbology.
Uh-huh. Well, I have, you're right. So does it have a symbol? Somebody might put the IOOF symbol, which doesn't need a lot of notes. That's more like a searchable field. Whereas symbology notes is it has this really unusual picture of a plant. And that plant has symbology. Those particular flowers have meanings. So that's where somebody would go and type some notes about what the symbol means. It's more interpreting the symbol. And like I said, not all these data fields are going to get used, right?
People have started putting photographs on some.
Yes.
Whether you would want that, okay,
Like an enameled photo.
whatever. It's just something that's being done.
You're right. Okay. Anything else on that? All right, and now we get into the long, complicated one of military stones. So I will go through this one slide per item here. Branch of service, conflicts, rank, the actual inscription, which is all in abbreviated code, which takes some time to understand, honors or service awards, the military monument type, and notes. There's just a lot of variation here. So this was what we're working on, a project right now that will publish in July on military veterans. Kay is helping a lot with that research, and I'm learning a lot, and I'm learning how much I don't know. And so this is a great way to kind of break it down and figure out where our assumptions are wrong and what we're missing. So thank you, Clark. I added your notes to this. But just looking at branch of services, you got Air Force, Army, Coast Guard, Marines, Navy, Union States Army, Confederate States Army, Texas Rangers, Texas Army, National Guard, other National Guards, U.S. Space Force, Merchant Marines, Texas Independence Fighters, because that's not, it's like not quite a there were battles. We can also put that under conflict, so that might not need to be there, but we talked about it this morning. The Texas Navy, from when the Texas had its own, was a republic and had its own Navy. And then multiple or other service things that we missed that are more idiosyncratic or unique. For example, we've got someone at Austin Memorial Park who was in the British Royal Navy, He served in World War II, which is easy to understand, but we're not going to put British Royal Navy in here for one person, right? So that might be a multiple or others. And some people served in more than one service and more than one conflict. So on conflicts, we've got War of 1812 is the earliest ones at our cemeteries, Texas Revolution, Comanche Wars, the Texas Indian Wars, the American Civil War, Spanish-American War, Philippine War, Mexican Border War, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf War, the War on Terror, and then multiple or other. And we've discovered we have quite a few people who've served in 3 and sometimes more conflicts. So that's really unique and notable. So you're not just checking one box on any of these things. There are lots of people to check in on. And then one of my staff researchers, Alan Garcia, noted that we have someone buried at the Oakwood Annex who served in the Mexican Revolution. So there may be more. If there's just one, we'll put that multiple or other. But if we come across enough idiosyncratic things, just because we're talking about Texas history here and Mexico as our neighbor, and you may have had enough migration of Tejanos and Mexican Americans that might be applicable to more than a unique case. Rank. So Ryan Piper, my staff member, is a U.S. Army veteran, so he helped me go through and kind of list some of these out. But then when we're looking at the inscriptions, there's just still so much more variety. So this is something we can click if we know it, but I'm not sure with 5,000 veterans in our cemeteries, we're gonna know that for every single person. If you read through this later and or think of anything I'm missing or have another resource you want to point me to compare lists, I would love to hear that. Inscription means actually reading the monuments and writing down exactly what they talked about in their military service. So for example, from my previous list, William Henry King was a first sergeant, Company A, 2nd Regiment of the U.S. Dragoons. I wouldn't have put dragoons, so he was in the Mexican War, but that's a particular service unit. And then here on Fred Sidney Wattinger, the Wattinger family have family members buried in this one lot that were in every different branch of service, which is really unique in itself. And then Fred was a major in the U.S. Air Force, served in Vietnam. And these acronyms, I have to go research, but if you type them in perfectly as is, then you can do a data search to find out if more than one person has that. DFC, BSM, AM, W14, OLC, NDSM, W1, BSS. I don't know what any of that means.
I don't either.
But someone does, right? And if we find somebody else who's got similar things, that might be a story worth investigating.
Jennifer, I have a question.
Yeah.
So wouldn't there also be a place under the monument data for inscriptions, and that could go there? I mean, any inscription would be a good thing to record, whether it's military or not.
You are very right. That's a very big missing thing. Inscription needs to be a big field note. Thank you.
But you don't need all of that stuff that people put on there. Well, you can inscriptions for service, I understand. Oh, okay. You're going back to military now. Okay.
Yeah. So I just put that inscription note if somebody, like some of it's just beautiful poetry that you just want to make note of. Like there's one called that just says the unknowable future at Oakwood. And that's just really poetic. And I want to know where it is and not just be like, oh, it's over there in section 1 and walk around for an hour to try and find it. Like if it's something notable, I want to have a data field to put it in.
You could also say that if there is something that you can't read, it may be on another headstone and we might be able to fill in the blank.
Yeah, true. So for military one, there's so much detail in those acronyms that we just want to transcribe it as from the stone. And then if there's a place to fill that in notes later, we can. So Kay helped me look at the service records for veterans at Austin Memorial Park, and I asked her to highlight people who looked like they had notable service or something when we want to double back and check in. And she highlighted these people. I just picked them because they were within a group on the spreadsheet, and it says PH, PH, PH. And I was all like, the Philippines. We served in World War I in the Philippines. No, that's Purple Heart winners. So it took me a minute and that pattern to like connect the dots. And so, then we have POWs, we have Purple Heart winners, we have a Congressional Medal of Honor winner, we have Distinguished Service Awards. So honors and awards needs its own category. Then military monument type. Of the traditional marble ones, you have a Civil War type, a Confederate type, and a general type. And then you have flat ones. And then you have bronze ones that are both flat type, and you have symbols that are adhered to granite or other stones. And in this case, you have a whole bronze plaque mounted to the back of a headstone. So this is Norman Scales, who served with the Tuskegee Airmen in World War II. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, which we see from here, but it doesn't say Tuskegee Airmen here. We just know that from our biographical research. But the front of the stone is 2 hearts for him and his wife, and doesn't have any military inscription. So you have to look at the whole piece to see some of the military headstones. And some people who may have had very distinguished service don't have military headstones at all. They didn't opt for that. And then some of our older ones, this is the Dietrich Monument, and it has this really elaborate relief carving and symbology that includes 2 cannons with cannonballs. So that's really untypical, but it's a symbol that you know it's a military monument. But you wouldn't put it under a typical monument type. It would be its own category. Before I go on, any comments on those types of fields? Am I missing anything that you can see?
Well, are you gonna, I guess, are you thinking about having a separate data entry screen or whatever for civilian monuments versus military?
No. If there's data to be shared, it will show up. It won't, like our digital map will have a pop-up, and you can configure the pop-up to only show the information you have. So if the field is empty, it just condenses.
Okay, because I mean, just say inscription, for example. I mean, rest in peace, or
Yeah.
Jesus. I mean, and you got that back on slide 13 or 14. We probably need to add that because that's there all the time, just like the wedding.
Yeah.
Of a wedding on, say, a double marker. But okay.
Thank you. Anything else? So next we have images. We're going to have a lot of different photos and some storage systems, cloud-based storage systems like Google or Dropbox or Box.com or others are public-facing links. So you could put a picture in your Google Drive and get a link to it, and it can show up somewhere and be public-facing. So you don't have to have data storage of your photos if you're doing kind of a DIY database. You can just have links, but you still want to manage your file sizes and file types. And I was trying to come up with the type of photos we would have. So you have monument photos, which are like beautiful pictures on a nice day that are not quite marketing, maybe marketing sometimes, but are like in good, like beautiful monument, check this out. And then you might have people photos of the person or of their family, or historic photos, high res, different types of things, but it's a photo. And we'll need to have a way that we store the data references from what archive it needs to be credited with and what kind of information it needs to be credited with along with the photo. So for us, we need to like make sure we're crediting the Austin History Center or the Portal to Texas History correctly when we include a photo here. One of the things you can do if it is on the Portal to Texas History is just include the link to the spot on the Portal to Texas History so that you've made a note to others or your future self where to find it, but you don't have to manage data storage here. Then you have places photos, like this gentleman here is Everett Gibbons, who was a notable African-American dentist in East Austin. And he was drafted in the Army at age 30 and served as a dentist in a military conflict, came back and was a dentist in Austin, but there were very few pictures. So the Alan Garcia at the George Washington Carver found this newspaper clipping with a picture and scanned it for us. So there also is a Gibbons Park. So if you have a places photo that goes with his namesake, you can also put a places photo that's about his legacy. And then this monument is one of the Swisher monuments. He served in the battle for Texas independence. And his monument has damage to it. There's a plaque missing here and some metal object that's missing. And so there's conservation photos that are important as well. Am I missing any types of photos that you?
No, I see places as unnecessary. You're creating a whole world, and we can't do a whole world.
Okay.
I mean, some things people can take and do research. Places is almost undefinable. Where they lived, where they grew up, where they died, where they served, what kind of places. I just see that as an overkill.
Okay.
Like as far as photos go, say on Find a Grave, and you got grave, person, family, other, I think are the four. You know, if you add a photograph, they ask you which type of a photograph it is, but
Yeah, a lot of this is all on Find a Grave. The only problem is who knows what's going to happen to Find a Grave, but we're duplicating a whole lot that they've already done.
I agree. Well, I agree that well, Find a Grave may go away, but also you don't know who put the information and how dependable it is.
Yeah, anything somebody's entered on their own is non-verified unless it's a document. So
yeah, we're actually in the process of having to find access or get into contact with someone who posted a couple that were on Find a Grave from Austin Memorial Park, and they mixed up the headstones for two different sites. And so one's in one section, but the names are similar enough to where they just got them crisscrossed, and we have to, because people use Find a Grave to get around the cemeteries a lot of the time, and we're trying to figure out if we can get access to the person to say, hey, can you switch things? Because once it's up there, it's set in stone and no one else can edit.
send me a note on that. I know a bunch of people that worked over there.
Okay, will do.
It is not set in stone. You can send them corrections. We do that all the time.
Yes, if they check their Find a Grave messages. I'm still waiting to hear back from one that I had a follow-up question on a year ago, and they never responded.
Not the volunteer Find a Grave. You can send Find a Grave a correction.
Yes, that's what we ended up doing, because this happened yesterday. So we haven't heard back yet, but we submitted that yesterday.
Hey, Jennifer,
Yeah.
the people photos be called portraits?
Yeah.
Just to simplify what it is. And you know, the thing about the place photo is kind of interesting. I agree with Kay that it could go on forever, but what if they have a famous home or a famous business, something that's still standing, or they establish the theater that's still standing, or something like connected to their life. I don't know. I could kind of see it interesting, almost like a like a museum tour, or like a reenactment where you just learn another thing about their life. And then when you go by that hotel or that home or that theater, you think of that grave site. I don't know.
I think I look at this as a volunteer project with unending, unending will never be finished because there's just so much.
Mhm.
I'm not expecting volunteers to fill out every field. I need someplace to put the stuff the volunteers have already found. Does that make sense?
You got one issue about how much of this stuff is available in a cemetery at the gravesite looking at the stone. You know, you can take the photo, you can get the GPS coordinates, the type of stone, the size of stone, and all that. And that helps you, you know, record it, you know, just so that records aren't lost. But then I think on the forward, the public facing side of this database, that's where all this stuff's going to come in. You know, once they find a grave that you entered into the database, they find it in the system, then, oh, hey, that's grandpa. I have a picture of grandpa. I have a picture of his old house or whatever. You know, I think you've got two different parts of this thing. One is data entry, you know, by people in the field, and then one is public data entry later.
I think there's already somebody that does that. So I don't see why we would need to duplicate it.
I'm trying to really more make a storage system for what we have and not ask people to go.
You know, Clark mentioned something GPS. You don't have anything for GPS on there. You just have lot and space and.
Well, typically your JPEGs, if you take them with a modern camera, the pictures will be.
Yeah, they all have it now. That.
Yep. With our digital maps, we'll have all that location data already in there. So if you imagine that lot rectangle, imagine it as a box where we stuff the stuff we've got already. So that's basically how I'm thinking of it, is like an organizational system, which Stack already uses as you going by cemetery, section, lot. And then you have a folder and you have all that stuff in it, right? So I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm trying to organize a lot of bits of data. That's all. And I'm not, what we ask our volunteers to do is not have every field completed. But if a descendant shows up and is like, hey, let me tell you about so-and-so, I gotta have a place to put it, you know, and organize it.
One last thing, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but like with Find a Grave, you know, in 2017, I went around with a centimeter level GPS unit, and I got centimeter level GPS coordinates for every headstone, footstone, corner marker, tree, bush, shrub, water faucet in my 17-acre cemetery. And I got all that in the spreadsheet. I've got the Find a Grave information. I've got everybody's Find a Grave memorial number, You know, that there's probably only about 5% of the memorials in that cemetery on Find a Grave that are geotagged. I contacted Find a Grave. Hey, if I give you a spreadsheet with just your Find a Grave memorial number in latitude and longitude, can you upload it? Nope. So they said, you'll have to do that manually. I'm sorry, I wasn't going to sit there and enter 3,400 latitudes and longitudes. So that's just why I put it on my own website and kind of said the heck with Find a Grave. So, I mean, I realize that Find a Grave's out there and a lot of that information, people are doing it over there. But then by the same token, you know, I've got GPS coordinates of every memorial in my cemetery, but it's not on Find a Grave. So I'm liking something like this just because you put extra features in it. If those boxes get filled up, great. But if they don't, at least you, like I said, you had a place to put it. So hats off on that one. It may get to be a data storage issue, but data's cheap.
Anyone else have comments about this?
Yeah, I think it's a transition from a cemetery as a place where people are buried and we have some history on them to a cemetery as a museum and a collection of a person's life, or what people want to contribute about a person's life. Contribute, sort, search. I also see it being really useful for fundraising. If you have like memberships, university, college attendance, certain businesses where here's all the medical doctors in our cemetery. Would you give funding to repair some of these headstones or something like that? Because we get a lot of calls about funding, and I think it's a really interesting idea, and it just keeps going and going and going, and it's true. Like Kay says, where do you stop? But I guess you stop at whatever people stop contributing. I mean, do you want to be the holding for all of this information? Or
Um,
are you already the holding all of this information and you're just trying to sort it?
yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and I want to make sure the information we have is accurate.
Right.
And if I've got records and information and bits in 20 different places, it's really hard to compare and put name misspellings in the notes field so that it's still searchable, but it's all in one spot.
Yeah.
One record per person. Yeah.
And this is stuff you would be putting on your website through the city
Mm-hmm.
where nobody would ever find it.
Well, maybe you'll share it. Okay. So here are some other things. PDF links. So instead of necessarily uploading PDFs, you could also save in your Google Drive, like this military record, Kay, you just sent me, which has so much information about this gentleman, including where he lives, type of military service, way more than we're going to get out of many other bits of records. Like there's a lot of information. We know what funeral home buried him. I just find it fascinating. There's a lot of detail on a military record. I don't necessarily need to have public facing image for every single person unless they're notable. But if we've come across it and I've already got it stored, I can put the link to where it is here as a PDF. We've been scanning funeral programs, and in African American culture in Austin, funeral programs are the best summaries of a person's life and a list of all their family members. So those are more, have more information than an obituary, which costs money to run in the paper, you know. But the families would spend this, and those were real keepsakes. And some of them are on the portal to Texas History, and the Carver Museum has tons of them. So for our cemeteries, that's really important. But you might be able to put a lot card if that's public information, a deed, if it's public information. Those may not be public information. That's birth, death certificates, funeral programs and obituaries, newspaper clippings, military service records, marriage, divorce records, historic marker data, prison records, because after, you know, Jim Crow laws, we had a lot of mass incarceration of people, and that is one way to know about their life. Freedom's Bureau records from a little before that, hopefully. Awards and honors of other things in their life besides military stuff, and notes. So that's just another details of things to file. Any other thoughts of types of documents we might come across?
I left out all the prison records because I wasn't sure that I could actually verify they were the same person.
No problem. I don't know if I necessarily want to publish the prison records, but if we come across one, I need a place to put it, if that makes sense. Other data fields, and which would just also be links. Online obituaries, online biographies that are already have citations like TSHA ones from the handbook, namesakes of buildings, streets, bridges, libraries, parks. We create story maps that include all of these things. So if we've published a story map on a person, we can put its link here. A legacy map is a map of all the places somebody lived, worked, their namesakes are, and where their gravesite is. We certainly don't plan to do that for every single person, but on our notable people, we might. A library archive collection record, like if the person donated their archives to a library and they have a finding aid online, we can just put that link there. If they have if there's an online video about them on YouTube, and sometimes when we host memorials, a family will have a video of the person's life. It's a photo montage. They might not be a notable person, but that's a pretty good way to know about their lives. Audio clips. Let's say you interviewed your great aunt and you recorded it and published it on SoundCloud or on StoryCorps. Then that would be a public facing audio clip and you could put a link to it here. I came across several SoundCloud interviews of Houston Tillotson professors that I used in my last exhibit. So that's just a place to put that as a link. And then I don't mean general websites where the person might be named. I mean, Alan Lomax has his own website of all of his musicology legacy. And so if there's like a whole website dedicated to the person, that's where I would put it. Does that make sense? You think I've missed anything there? So that's the part
I have
where
a few copyright issues, but
public facing links are public facing links, you know?
no. Yeah, if you're just doing the link, if you're doing the link and wherever it's hosted already, yeah.
Yeah. So it's really kind of detailed with the filing system, but this is where we start to get to where we have stories to tell the public. So if you, like in Mark Heap's case, are out trying to get people engaged in your historic cemetery that needs weed whacking and trash removal and monument surveying and cleanup and all those things. If you publish some stuff like this, that gives you like juicy news for your local paper or radio station, and then you can attract volunteers because volunteers get tired of doing the weed whacking and the trash cleanup for 25 years. So you're always going to need some new volunteers to get drawn into your project to help. You may not have a big budget to pay a contractor. So if you have some of these storytelling opportunities, that can be a newsy item, and it could go along with like a holiday like Juneteenth or something like that. And so this is an opportunity, like some of these more storytelling things are important. When it comes to other than just notes on a subject, there's some text fields that I feel a little blank on, but a short biography, like if I've already created a short biography for our brochure and I've spent some time making the language just right, I want a place to go put that because in the next edition of the brochure that might change. If a person's family was notable in a certain way, maybe their whole family isn't buried in the cemetery, but one person is, but their family affected history, that's a place you could put some notes. For example, we have a folk musician buried in the Oakwood Annex, who, because his family, who were not very wealthy Mormons, sat around and sang a bunch of folk songs and kept those songs alive. They happened to be recorded by John Lomax. John Lomax donated in the Library of Congress, which is where Bob Dylan heard them and re-recorded some of those songs. So the Gant family is notable for that, even though Nephi Gant wouldn't be notable by himself. Does that make sense? But the family might have some notes. Genealogy notes. Some people are really doing elaborate records and research. Not every record on Ancestry.com is public by any means, but if you have an opportunity to like put in some notes somewhere, this would be more of a text field about somebody doing research. Did I miss anything big there that might be a little bit more text versus link?
Is anybody besides Clark using a program like or similar to this?
Some other people in our morning meeting were.
I think the Texas State Cemetery is coming out with a new webpage, and I don't
Oh.
know what they're going to be doing, but
Theirs is so good. That was on my notes here, the top item. What's wrong with what they do? Nothing.
that is really interesting because I had an hour-long conversation with a man just before this meeting who hates the Texas State Cemetery's webpage and wants to volunteer to improve it. And everyone has their own opinion, is what I learned.
Well, I just think it's easy to find. It's easy to use. It tells you what they know. I just think theirs is great.
Good to know. And last, but definitely not least, are other things, the story part. If they were a notable author or writer, or a stonemason who built important buildings, or a philanthropist, or a fireman, how do we categorize and storytell around that? And then we have cultural groups: African American history, Mexican American and Tejano history, Indigenous tribes history, Asian American history, women's history, Jewish history, and LGBTQ history. And I'm sure I've missed some groups. Unique to our cemetery, but you might have your own unique things you do at your cemetery, is Save Austin Cemeteries has some themed stuff. They do an annual tour called Murder, Mayhem, Misadventure. And if I had a category called Difficult Deaths, we could search through there for new stories that they wanted to pull and use for reenactment tours. They did a very elaborate Texas Independence tour, which we helped digitize, but is not nearly as fun as the reenactment tours. So your own particular cemetery might have a particular theme that you might not want to totally put in the database, but how do you kind of keep track of that record? And then substantially, and something I know really generally very little about, are guilds, memberships, and organizations. Woodmen of the World, Daughters of the American Revolution, the American Legion, Order of Eastern Star. Like, there's so many of those that have information on the cemeteries. And when I was looking up some of those things, my favorite one is the Concatenated Order of Hoo-Hoos. I'm just like, that's good, the Concatenated Order of Hoo-Hoo. That is not anything I know much about, but I know if it's on the monument, we really need to address it. So that might be a list we're still working through. But we want to make sure that, like Paul in our meeting this morning, I had medical doctor here, but he was like, how do we write women's history into the professional history? And maybe including midwives and nurses and medical information is a way to do that well. But I just feel like notable is interesting, but tradespeople are also interesting. You know, there are ways to do storytelling about everybody. So I'd be curious if you had any categories that you think are wildly missing from these cultural and professional organizations.
I think it's a great start. I think you'll add to it perhaps as you go through them, maybe.
Someplace under, and maybe you would put it under notes or something. Heritage, German, Swedish, Italian.
Yeah.
Because there's so many people that it states they came from so-and-so.
Andrew, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. Did you say you were going to send this out afterwards? Because clearly there are going to be some follow-on thoughts as we go through our separate endeavors. Or do you want us to just, okay, great.
And you're welcome to, like, when I send this, you'll be able to make comments on it. Or you can read it and send me an email, whatever is most convenient for you. Or if you want to call me up and talk about it, we can do that too.
Okay, thanks.
So this is kind of my last presentation slide, other than what am I missing, which I know Kay will tell me you have too much in there already. And how are we doing? Is this a reasonable process in terms of asking you for feedback, trying to organize this information? We don't want to be the last kid on the block to show up with good information. We want to be first in line and field test it. When you say who's going to be doing all of this work, me. I'm going to be doing this work for the rest of my job. And I love
You can be sure you'll have a job forever if you're going to do all this.
Where else would I at that chapel? Like, that's crazy. But I like to be organized. And 2.5 years into this job, not having a proper filing system is making me kooky. And then to really learn in that filing system what people want to know and how to engage people in history in our cemeteries is super important. So how are we doing on that? That's really an open question, which you can holler at now or later after you've thought about it. But that's why this is important, is to me. And I need to know if, like, I genuinely don't expect to fill in every one of those data fields for everybody. I do not. But I want to think about how to do it properly in a best practices kind of way. Caitlin?
I just wanted to add, just to make sure everyone's aware, the creation of the database itself is happening anyway, because we are needing to update our system in order to do maintenance projects and to organize current and up-to-date burials as they come in and as admin sells sites. So all of this is being done in addition to it, but it's happening anyways. So I can't remember what my original point was, but basically to make sure that it does look like it's a lot that's happening and there's a lot that's going on, but it's something that's happening in conjunction with another project. That's all.
So if you care to give us some feedback about how we're doing, we'd love to hear it now or later. It's important. It's important to know. And secondly, once we get all of this kind of sorted out and its tires kicked and do a test draft with our veterans, because they're complicated, that's why we're picking them. We would love to share this back with you. And Jenny, I'd love to, you know more about this than the rest of us really. Kay knows a lot, but you see the whole state of Texas cemeteries too. See how we can best share this and our process with the public so that other large and small cemetery managers can utilize this to get people
Or
to
if
care
there's
more.
some of these already set up somewhere that we can just look at and say, that's a good feature, or that seems redundant, or.
You know, Kay, I've been trying to think of some as the course of this was going on, and I know that Clark, so, you know, I have the whole state, but then Clark has every detail of everything within his cemetery. So we're kind of at opposite ends, and I'm trying to think of anybody who has, that I know of, that has this much stuff to be organized.
Well, we like to be first, so.
I think it's great. Like I said, I love this kind of transition from a cemetery being a place of rest, a place to visit, to an actual learning place, a museum, an interactive museum.
Now, just to be aware of another program going on, I was asked to be a part of an advisory last month by 2 professors at Texas A&M. They're part of the VA project. They actually have a grant, and they're calling it the Veterans Legacy Advisory Board. The project is the Veterans Legacy Geographic Information Systems Citizen Science Approach to Extended Memorialization Digitally project. Yeah, I need to take a breath after that. Basically, what they're going to, they're really they're really concentrating more on veterans' graves, specifically, you know, Aggie veterans, in which we told them pretty quick, that's great, but you just fill in a field that says alma mater, you don't make it just about A&M. But they're talking about drone, you know, flying cemeteries with drones, reading headstones with artificial intelligence technology. They've got it, what they're calling a VA Legacy Citizen Scientist program, where they'll train people to go out and, properly input the data. It's going to be a neat project if they open it up, obviously, to just more than just A&M and then to more cemeteries other than just the national cemeteries, which I think that's the legacy citizen scientist program. But I can reach out to them or I can maybe get them in touch with you, Jennifer, or whatever.
Yeah, I'd love an introduction.
Yeah, I'll work on that.
And Andrew, I'm going to email you. I've got some questions about Hornsby.
Great. I look forward to hearing from you.
So is there anything I can share or do with you? I'll send out the link to this presentation to everybody who attended these 2 meetings today, now that I've fixed my typos and added a few notes. Any other thoughts?
Well, just a little bit more on your distribution. I mean, obviously, you're going to work on this for your cemeteries first, and that's understandable because that's what you're paid to do. And then just the thoughts on, okay, how are you going to roll it out statewide, nationwide, whatever, to other cemeteries?
Yeah.
Kind of specifically, are you going to have any issues with the city of Austin? Making
we like to do things that are for the public good, which is also why we're trying to figure out what's private and what's public information. And I'm sure Caitlin will have more feedback from me offline or after she meets with the cemetery team. My background is in community engagement. So I like to do how do you get people interested to show up and care? That's my part. So I am not a data scientist. I am not a cemeteries expert. I am becoming better at those things. So in terms of dissemination, I think it's really working with the THC because they, or perhaps your Aggie friends that have some funding, could take this data information and do the open source version, which is shareable and then usable by volunteers, So really it's all about collaboration and making things available to all types of volunteers and sizes of cemeteries and places. A lot of these fields are focused on Texas history, which would not mean anything in Vermont, right? So some of those things would just be line throughs and then replaced with Vermont history, or other countries even. So I don't know. I'm super glad Jenny McWilliams was able to join us, and I will keep following up with her because she is definitely the person people throughout the state of Texas contact. So
Jenny's good people. She's good people.
Good. Well, I look forward to hearing your thoughts, and I really, really appreciate your time today. If there's anything I can do, I'm a resource for you.
Jennifer,
Thank
the
you.
gentleman this morning that was the caretaker of the Black Cemetery, I can't think of his name.
Paul Jennings.
Yes. Do you know how big that cemetery is?
No, but I can send you a link to it. It's Oakwood Cemetery in Houston.
Okay. All right. If you don't mind, yeah, I'd just like to take a look at that and see what we.
Sure. Any other questions or thoughts? Thank you. And
Thank you, Jennifer.
Enjoy your rainy afternoon. I'm celebrating it's the last day of public school for my kids. So here they will come shortly after their last day of school. So hopefully we will have a joyous weekend. Thank you. I'll follow up later.
Thank you.
Thank you.